Well, hi there. Here we are once again, the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Caleb Jones. We're talking here about location-independent income, moving to a less bad country, or at least setting up an international backup plan and doing all these things for very little money. Just so you're aware, I have another podcast I also release once a week in addition to this podcast called the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast. We talk about lifestyle design, freedom-focused lifestyle design for men. If you want to check that out, that is over at alphamale20.com/podcast. This is one of these unique podcasts. Every once in a while I do this where I have a topic, but I have no outline and I have no agenda. I'm just going to speak 100% extemporaneously. I do this as kind of a test for myself to test my mettle, to see how well I can speak on a topic when I have no prep work done. And to make it particularly difficult, I have given myself a particularly difficult topic. So we'll see how well I do with this. We'll see how I pull this off. If I do poorly or well, you can certainly let me know in the comments if I do either. There is a weird dichotomy that we're experiencing in the world right now. This is the topic of this, and then I'll speak extemporaneously. I already am speaking extemporaneously, can you tell? There is a weird dichotomy, and it's very hard to wrap our heads around. I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's hard to wrap my head around this. But it's true. And that is this. We live in the best time in all of human history to be alive right now. And I know when I say that, you go, wait a minute, but woke people. Right. So here's the other side of this. This is also, in many respects, the worst time to be alive in at least modern history. And these are both true at the same time. Huh? Yeah. So you have to kind of wrap this around your head and then use this as a baseline to exploit this and to build a great life. I will explain, or at least I'll do my best to explain, extemporaneously. I've read many books about this. One of the best books is the book Abundance by Peter Diamandis. I think I'm saying his name correctly. But there are many books about this. Worldwide poverty, all-time historic low by far, by a massive wide margin. Worldwide poverty, massively historic low. It's amazing as compared to just 20 years ago, 30 years. Every decade, it dramatically improves by leaps and bounds. It's incredible. Just in my lifetime, I was born in 1972. Worldwide poverty was way worse in 1972 than it is today by huge margins. It's amazing. The numbers are staggering. Wars, deaths caused by wars. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in all of human history. You had multiple world wars. You had China's Great Leap Forward. You had Stalin's bullshit. You had Hitler's bullshit. A lot of people got killed during the 20th century. Before that, there were lots of wars, constant wars, especially in Europe. And today, even though we are all scared, or at least you guys are scared, I don't care, about the war in Ukraine, if you look at the world, large-scale war, all-time historic low. This is one of the most peaceful eras in not recent history, but all of human history. Okay, this is pretty awesome. Technological growth, I don't even need to tell you about this, how, the typical Westerner lives a lifestyle because of technology where they would have a medieval equivalent of 200 servants. So even if you are a low-income, poor person living in the United States, you have the equivalent of 200 medieval servants working for you in terms of like microwave, television, air conditioning, running water, toilets, all that stuff. It's amazing. Standard of living is the highest it's ever been in all of human history. Now it's starting to get worse in the Western world as the Western world begins to collapse. I'll cover that in a little bit. But standard of living, it's pretty amazing. One of the reasons that men in particular today are so soft and wimpy and beta is because it's easy to live today. You do your work. Most of your work is probably typing on a goddamn keyboard. Are you out there with a sledgehammer, hammering in, bolts into a fucking railroad all day in 120-degree heat? No, you're taking your fingers doing click, clickety, click, 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 click on a goddamn keyboard all day, right? That's your quote work. Then when you're done with your quote work, you sit on your big dumb ass and you watch Netflix and you bitch about stuff on the internet, and you smoke your weed, and it's a really easy life, okay? Right? So in many respects, factually, objectively, this is the best time to be alive in many respects. Now, it's also a horrible time to be alive. especially if you are a libertarian like me and you value small government. If you're a libertarian, this is one of the worst eras to be alive in all of human history. I have written before about how most historians agree that the greatest single 100 years in all of human history was 1813 to 1913. And during that time, you had governments that were embracing individual freedom, embracing capitalism, not a lot of wars, some wars, but not near a lot of wars, dramatic technological improvement, dramatic improvement in standard of living, even more so than the 20th century, and even more so during today in certain aspects. So if you were a libertarian type guy, it was a pretty cool time to be alive between 1813 and 1913. I think about that a lot. If I had been born like in the 1840s, somewhere in the Far East or something like that, it would have been a very interesting life. Now, again, you'll say, well, yeah, but then you never took showers, and then you didn't have toilet paper, and then how did you shave? And that's all true too. That's my point, is these things are true at the same time. Many people, particularly those of a more conservative political bent, lament about how horrible everything is socially and politically, and how better it was back in the United States in the 1950s, early 1960s. Very true. Matter of fact, the longest, strongest economic boom in the United States was the mid-1940s to the mid-1960s. People think it was the 90s, or they think it was the early 2000s. No, it was actually between 1946, end of World War II, and around the early 1960s, around the assassination of JFK. That was the biggest economic growth period of the United States, and probably the biggest one in the Western world. It wasn't the biggest one in history. That would have been China's rise in the 1990s and early 2000s. But that being said, if you had lived in the 1950s, there are a lot of things you wouldn't be able to do. I mean, my entire lifestyle, my personal life, my business life, my Five Flags life would be pretty much impossible if I was living right now in the 1950s. If not impossible, extraordinarily difficult and very time-consuming. So that's the bottom line here. If you want to survive and thrive during the current Western collapse in which we live, and yes, I agree, it would be a lot better to live in the Western world when the Western world was on the way up instead of on the way down, even though this is the best time to be alive in all of human history. See, it's all happened at the same time. If you want to survive and thrive, you have to wrap your head around the concept that A, this is the worst time to be alive in modern history, and B, this is the best time to be alive in all of modern history, or perhaps in all of history. And these two things are true at the same time, depending on what aspects you look at. This is good news. So I have talked before about how I am in awe of men who were entrepreneurs back in like the 1950s, 1940s. My grandfather did this. He started a small insurance company in Alaska, amazingly, back in the 40s and 50s. The time and effort it took to start a business back in like the 1950s, before you had the internet, before you had email, before you had e-commerce, before you had credit cards, before you had FedEx. I mean, back then, if you wanted to send a piece of paper to someone, you couldn't email it, you couldn't fax it, you couldn't FedEx it. You had to type it on a manual typewriter, click, 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 and then mail it and then wait a week to get a response. Isn't that insane? And they had no Upwork. There was no outsourcing, and that you had to hire an employee. Employees cost a lot of money. Had to hire an employee and build a business from scratch, brick by brick by brick. I am in awe of entrepreneurs who did this. I can't believe it. And the difficulty it was in starting a business back then as compared to today, where you could be making literally thousands of dollars in your brand new location independent business within 90 days. And people in our 90-day business builder program have done this. That wouldn't have been possible in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, with rare exception. So you and I live in an era where, yes, the Western world is collapsing. Yes, CBDCs are right around the corner. Yes, another pandemic is probably around the corner, historically speaking. Yes, the whole world gets more left-wing every year. Yes, the governments become more authoritarian every year. Yes, taxes go up and inflation goes up every year, and they will continue to do so. Yes, Five Flags gets harder to do every year. A lot of things you can do right now with Five Flags you won't be able to do in 5 years from now. As I've said many, many, many times, the longer you wait, the harder this gets. Yes, everything's getting worse. Yes, the entire United States is turning into a homeless shelter. Yes, these are all occurring. At the same time, because you also live in the best time to be alive, you can escape it the most easily. You can travel the world anywhere. I've said this before. You can travel anywhere in the world for $800. You can round trip ticket to anywhere in the world for $800. Now, you say, well, I don't have $800. Could you get $800? Yes. You can start a business for $0. I did. I've done it. Maybe, $20, $30 for a domain name or something. That's it. You don't even need that, frankly, to start a business. You can start a business for $0 and be making thousands of dollars within a few weeks. You can do it. You can do that. That wasn't possible years ago. So even though you have these huge problems in our societies right now, the Western world is indeed collapsing. And if you live outside the Western world like I do, you have less of a problem with this. I don't really give a fuck anymore. But even though you have that scenario, you also have the wherewithal that we never had before to get out of this and to not only survive and thrive, but also take advantage of the collapsing Western world. This entire company, Sovereign CEO, is profitable because the United States, Canada, and Europe are collapsing. If the United States, Canada, and Europe were doing great and on the way up and everything was wonderful and it was prosperity and it looked great for the next 25 years, who would buy my products? Honestly, who would buy any of my, get residency stuff and moving out of the collapsing Western world? And who would give a shit about location-dependent income, about traveling when everything was perfect in the United States? Nobody. So I'm exploiting the collapse of the Western world using these technologies that weren't available to me before. I even talked about things like cryptocurrencies, NFTs, which are the future. Yes, they collapse, but we all knew that was going to happen. Gary Vee said that many times. AI, yes, it's going to take a lot of people's jobs, but it's also going to make your life a lot fucking better in many ways too. I mean, they said the exact same things about AI. They said about cars. Oh no, cars. All these people go out of business. All these buggy whip people. Were you better off when cars were invented? Yes. Are you going to be better off when AI is invented once we go through the adjustment period? Yes. So all these things are good things. So don't get too down in the dumps when you see all this negativity on the internet. And the negativity is real. It's real. Yes, 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 yes. But don't let that affect you because you also live in the best time it has ever been to be alive. And you can take advantage of things that your dad, your grandfather never had. I mean, I'll be Grandpa Caleb for a minute here. Back in my day, when I was a little kid, you would go see a movie. Now, to be fair, this was when movies were good. So movies have been terrible since 2017 or so. Movies are horrible now. TV shows are horrible. Back in my day, we had great movies. But, when you were a little kid in my day, in the 70s and early 80s, when you saw a movie you really liked, you went to the movie theater and you saw it. Maybe you saw it more than once if you really liked it. And then it would leave the movie theater and you'd never see it again. That's it. You'd never see it again. Ever. You're fucked. You want to see it again? Sorry. You never saw it again. Ever. Never. You didn't see it again. Maybe if you were very lucky, it was a very big movie, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, it might be on NBC or ABC as a nighttime special, and they would edit the hell out of it, and there'd be commercials and shit. Maybe if you were lucky. That was it. But then they invented the VCR, and all of a sudden, holy shit, now you can rewatch the awesome movies you saw in the theater. That was such a huge revelation. Then later they had, DVDs, and today they have Netflix. So it was a whole different thing. So it got better, and it got worse. Movies are now terrible. Movies are awful. TV shows are awful. So it got way better and it got way worse at the same time. That's my point here. And you need to focus on how do I use the good to leverage myself out of the bad. That is what I've done over the past 15 years of my life. 16 years, 17 years, actually, almost 20 years. I've looked at the bad things and I say, okay, how can I use the good things to get me out of the bad things instead of completely focused on the bad things? And a lot of you, unfortunately, are there. You're focused on the bad things. You're focused on all the woke people. You're focused on Joe Biden. You're focused on the feminists. You're focused on CBDCs. You're focused on the Great Reset. You're focused on this. And you're not focused on building your own location-independent Alpha 2.0 business, moving out of the collapsing Western world and paying virtually zero or literally zero taxes legally, going somewhere where it's much less expensive to live and the weather is better and you're on the beach. For you single guys or single gals, going to a country where it's much easier to date and the women are better looking and the men are better looking, okay? For you gals, I got to cover both men and women here. You're not looking at that. You're just too focused on the problems. I would suggest you focus on both. And I just told you how to do it. How do I use the good to get me out of the bad instead of focusing on bad all day? Okay? That is a winning model. That is a model that has made me very happy, made me very successful financially, made me have an amazing, off the chart, amazing personal life. Those of you who follow my Alpha Male 2.0 content, you know what I'm talking about. That's how I've been able to pull this off, by using the good to get me out of the bad. Instead of just saying, oh, the bad sucks. Oh, I'm going to be scared. Oh, no, it's awful. Do both. You can do both. Okay? Make sense? Hope that makes sense. If you want me to talk more about this, I can. This is a big topic. Let me know in the comments. I can certainly do a part 2 to this podcast. But that's it. Remember this. Think about this. It's true. It'll change your life. You really get into this. You really follow this concept. You'll do great things. And it'll be easier than you think. Cool? Cool. All right. See you next podcast. Bye.